So I'm Ryan Buetow. I'm a NDSU Extension Cropping System Specialist out west at the Dickinson Research Extension Center. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about some issues that, um, it's a pretty common thread for out west here, but I did survey a handful of producers and crop consultants and extension agents on what they see as some major issues in corn production. And from that survey, we found that drought is really our worst issue, right? You can't really grow much with less than 10 inches of rain, and in some situations 5 inches of rain, right? So drought is less than ideal. I also asked, what was their number 2, number 3, and I kind of ranked those based on some different answers. Length of growing season is a major issue. Heat, as Greg mentioned, once you get above that 86 degrees, the efficiency of that corn plant really gets greatly reduced. So especially when that hits right around tasseling and silking, right? Also, weed control can be an issue. Plant stand, we are seeing some soil pH issues in our reduced tillage systems, but drought is really our biggest issue out here. The past couple of years, right towards that, we're getting close to that reproductive growth. Depending on your maturity, we're seeing just a lack of moisture for several years. It's so dry out there that we can see cacti growing out in fields, right? So it's less than ideal for corn, especially. All right, so because of that, most of our production is in reduced tillage. So one of the great benefits of no-till is that we do see a large increase in water holding capacity. If you get a bunch of rain early on with reduced till, we have that soil armor, right? So we can hold on to that moisture for a longer period of time. But as Greg mentioned, if you don't have a very consistent stand, you can see some yield loss down the road. So, there are some, I know of at least one producer that kind of has a rotational strip till where every year that he has corn, he goes out and has a strip tillage pass. And then it's no-till for the other crops in that rotation. That great benefit of strip till is that you have that darker band of soil that warms up a little bit faster in the beginning of the growing season, and that residue doesn't cause some variability out there, right? So, but there are plenty of guys that are making it work with no-till, and there might be a little bit of variability early on, but it doesn't seem to be stopping them. So, but strip till is a way to kind of overcome some of that variability. Okay. So we are a little bit earlier on the maturities out this way. There are a few guys that do try to push it. Obviously, there's different levels of risk with each operation, and some guys like to gamble a little bit, right? But with that longer maturity, you do have a higher yield potential, since we don't always have the conditions to reach that. So most are growing in that 80 range, but there are a few going a little bit earlier than that as well. Okay, so we try to do our best. And as Greg mentioned, we do plant at a much lower population. So part of that, most people are growing 18,000 to 24,000. I know John Rickardson at the Hettinger Research Center, he plants his variety trials at 22,000 plants per acre. But there are a few people kind of in that 26,000 plants per acre. And the reason that we're much lower is there is research that goes back showing that in these drier conditions, what we really want to see is, kind of maybe 16,000 is a little low, but the lower, the idea there is that you have less plants competing for the water that is available. As new varieties have come out, maybe that needs to be updated a little bit, but we are trying to conserve our moisture to a degree, and we don't want to put a tropical plant out there with 5 inches of rain, right? So we want to try to use the moisture to our best ability. And so I mentioned John Rickardson down at Hettinger. So he does corn variety trials in the far southwest corner of the state. And you look at his yields, they're much lower than what Greg is showing in his slides, right? So, we're half of what that central part of the state is getting in a drought year, right? So we're looking at less than 10 inches of rain during that growing season. On the bottom there, from May 11th to October 28th, we're at 9.96 inches of rain during that growing season. And the varieties that he grew that year in 2022, yielding between 64 and 73 bushels, right? And that's a 2-year average is very low. When you get drought conditions, this might be high for some compared to some producers in the area. But if you get some timely rains and you kind of get lucky, you can have a little bit higher yields. But at the end of the day, you need rain, right? So in 2019, we had rain, a little over 15 inches of rain. So from May 30th to November 19th, Endon at Hettinger showed 15.38 inches of rain on the bottom there. And you can see the yields are basically doubled. So we're looking at anywhere from 112 up to in the 140s. Okay, so there's going to be a pretty wide range, but our yield potential is just much lower than the central part of the state, and that's just water at the end of the day. Okay, so there's not much you can do with limited moisture. So what we can do is we can use the water that we do have in our inputs to their best efficiency, right? So you can't fertilize yourself out of a drought. At the end of the day, you need moisture. You can work to increase the input use efficiency and to utilize the water that you do have more efficiently, right? So there are some things that will impact that plant-water relations. Along with that, you can increase your nitrogen use efficiency. I'm not saying don't apply any nitrogen early on, but you can maybe apply 2/3 if you're thinking that there's going to be drier conditions. You do want to have that end there once the rain does come, so you don't want to completely cut that in half. But there are people drastically reducing their first application and then trying to come back later if it does look like we're getting moisture. But it is hard to predict that. You never know. Unfortunately, some of our drought breakers have been 6 inches of rain at once, which can be difficult for your nitrogen use efficiency as well. So, I said you can't fertilize yourself out of drought. You can irrigate if you have suitable water and suitable soil as well for that. So there's a QR code on the bottom here, and I'm sure it's going to be put in the chat for this NDSU extension publication on compatibility of our soils for irrigation. We have a lot of sodic soils in our region, so not everyone is really able to do that out here, but it would be nice to have more than 9 inches of rainfall. So I mentioned, there are things that can impact those plant-water relations, and there are kind of 3 main soil issues in our part of the state that are causing issues with our ability to use the water that we do get, right? So on the bottom left there, you see a pretty common site. I'm sure even in the eastern part of the state, you see this, right? So salinity, where you have salts at the surface. And that's, you have that water evaporating, leaving those salts behind. Those salts can impact the plant's ability to take up water because the salts kind of stuff up those roots, right? Then on the bottom right, you see a sodic soil, so you can't see that from the surface. That's when you have a lot of sodium in the soil. So this isn't a saline thing, this is a sodicity thing. And you can have both a saline and a sodic soil. But usually what happens here is you can get some compaction, you get this muffin topping a little bit deeper down, and that can cause some compaction and some water issues as well. And typically these sodic soils are going to be a little bit higher on the pH side. And then at top right, you can't really see it in the soil, but you can usually see it in the field. We have a pH issue that we're having low pH. I know that sounds crazy to some of you, but we're seeing low pH below 5.5, right? So we have these different issues: salinity, sodicity, and acidity. Acidity is also causing us some issues with our ability to use the water that we do have, okay? So again, with salts, You can't apply any amendments to fix a saline soil. At the end of the day, that's a water management issue where you have more water evaporating than is transpiring through plant roots. So because of that, you're having salts accumulate at the surface, right? So we need to either have some kind of drainage or some kind of root growing there to reduce the amount of water that's evaporating. With a sodic soil, like I mentioned, with that compaction issue, gypsum is typically going to be the best way to deal with that, and that's going to be tons of gypsum and somewhere for that sodium to go as well to help reduce the dispersion that's causing that compaction. Acidity, so this is, there's a couple different ways you can get acidity in the soil. You can have a parent material that's naturally acidic. We do have plenty of areas in our state that are alkaline, right? So we have, either you're farming on top of limestone or maybe those sodic soils are causing that soil to be alkaline. But we have these areas and fields that have very high pH, above 7, above 8, that are causing us their own issues. But what we're seeing is, especially in reduced till systems, where we apply our nitrogen fertilizers, we're seeing the stratified layer of acidity, right? So nitrogen fertilizers, they do cause acidity. They change a pH. They cause a pH difference when hydrogen is added to that system. pH is just the measurement of hydrogen, right? So what we're seeing is, these different fertilizers applied over time. We've been told we don't have to worry about low pH because we've historically had high pH. You look at 20 years of no-till, that fertilizer is being placed in the same spot every year. For every 1 pound of anhydrous ammonia, we need 1.8 pounds of lime. For every 1 pound of nitrogen in MAP, we need 5.4 pounds of lime to neutralize that soil acidity. So that can add up over time, and we're seeing some pHs in the 4s and even as low as 3.9, right? So this is a stratified layer of acidity in the surface. That surface is where we're planting our seeds and applying fertilizer and a bunch of other things, okay? So the reason we care about that is it does impact our microbial communities in that soil, which impacts nitrogen fixation in legumes, impacts our herbicide breakdown, and impacts how a lot of our nutrients cycle as well. And then you get tie-up of different nutrients. The availability and the solubility of certain nutrients changes. You get aluminum all of a sudden becoming soluble. The plant can take it up. It impacts the phosphorus relations with the plant, and you can get tied up phosphorus. Even though the phosphorus is there, the plant can't take it up. And you can also get some toxicities going on in that soil. So it impacts our nutrients. Weed control is a major issue in that survey. That was the number 4 ranked issue. You're looking at green foxtail is a major issue for people. Kochia is a major issue for people. Potentially we're seeing a reduction in the efficacy of our herbicides. pH is a very important component of herbicide carryover, herbicide breakdown. You're looking at some of these issues. You're seeing some issues with sometimes they carry over longer than you want. You look at something like atrazine and you have a very acidic soil and it's just kind of tied up in that soil. If you look at page 100 and 101 of your herbicide, North Dakota weed control guide, there's a whole bunch of information on herbicide carryover. Some herbicides are going to have breakdown issues because of pH, whether that's low or high. And we have fields where we have both an acid soil in parts of it and a high pH in parts of it, right? Along with that, I've been mentioning drought, right? So there are some herbicides that we do use in corn that can cause some issues the next year. If we don't have enough moisture for that to break down, because we do heavily depend on those soil microbial communities, and they need a adequate pH range, but they also need moisture to kind of be active, okay? So, look at our IMIs. Those are gonna have a more persistence at a lower soil pH, so you could potentially see some carryover in your crop rotation. And then along with that, if you have parts of the field that are more persistent, parts of the field that are less persistent, you could see some issues with management, right? There's that higher pH. Look at our SUs. You see that more persistence at that higher soil pH, which we do have, right? But then you see that lower persistence at that low soil pH. And, if we're all of a sudden have a lower rate of something out there, that's a really good way to breed resistance in our weeds, right? You look at atrazine, right? So, this could be an issue if you've been applying atrazine to an acid soil and all of a sudden you lime it, and all of a sudden there's a lot more atrazine there than you thought there was. Acidity is a potential cause of a lot of issues, nutrient tie-up. We can see stand loss in very acid soils, and you can also see issues with herbicide efficacy, right? So we want to make sure that we're working in a functioning soil. If we do have these issues, we're not using the water and the nutrients that we do have out there to their best ability. And this isn't just a Western issue. We are finding this in other parts of the state. There's a very simple solution for this. Unfortunately, it's not something that we've historically had to do, but we can apply lime, right? So because we are mostly reduced till out here, we're working on ways to try to do it as a surface application. We're mainly working with sugar beet spent lime. So there's a lot of different factors that affect lime effectiveness. Obviously, if you have smaller particle sizes, it's going to dissolve a lot faster. At the same time, we need to kind of keep in mind the economics of it. If you can't get that extremely fine lime, that sugar beet lime, you can pick it up for free. You just got to pay the trucking and the application. So, but there is sometimes a little bit larger chunks in there. So we also need moisture to dissolve it, and we don't always have that when we need it. So we are working on ways to do this without incorporation. There's work out there saying it does work. I am concerned that some of our acidity is a little bit deeper, and I'm not sure that it's going to be timely enough to be impactful at a surface application. But we are doing that research because we don't want to go out and till these no-till fields. There's some major concerns there, right? So we have a trial near Mott where we have a couple different crop rotations. We have corn, sunflowers, wheat, and then a full season cover crop. With the full season cover crop, once that matures, we do graze that. We're kind of hoping the hoof action from those cattle work as a tillage system. But we did do a tillage pass. So this was applied in 2021. If you're looking on the screen here from left to right, the lime applications were applied across those rotation treatments. And then if you look in the bottom right, you can kind of see this darker strip through there. So that's where we did till. And so there's a tillage pass to try to incorporate that lime. And early on in the season, this year, so this is, a whole year later after the application, the sunflowers here in the bottom right looked much greener than the rest of the sunflowers. So that tillage pass looked greener. Maybe we had some nitrogen mineralizing. Maybe that lime worked a little bit better. But all of a sudden, as what happens out west fairly often, the rain turned off later in the season. So that strip went from looking better than the rest to looking much, much worse than the rest. And we saw some yield loss there, and it dried down and matured much faster just due to the lack of moisture. So, there's trade-offs with every management method. So that's going to have to be a case-by-case situation. You do get faster reaction with that lime with tillage, but ideally we don't want to have to till. And if we are doing zone sampling, that kind of stuff, we're not tilling the whole field, just where we're applying that lime. So some crops are more tolerant than others. Corn is kind of considered tolerant to a degree. You do notice yield loss as it gets highly acidic. You can only overcome so much with species selection. With hardwood spring wheat, we do know there are tolerant varieties, but that's also to a certain degree. Once it gets so acidic, you can only overcome so much with variety. So our herbicides are impacted. Aluminum becomes more available. That's toxic to the plant and can cause stunting of the roots. So you can see reduction in plant roots, which means you're not using your water very efficiently. Nutrient availability issues. you need to apply lime in these situations. So there's something to keep in mind if you are in a reduced till system. Sample a 0 to 3 and 3 to 6 inch sample for pH in these problem areas. Typically that acidity band is going to be wherever the fertilizer is. You know, it could be at the surface if you're applying surface urea, or it could be a little deeper down. I've noticed that barnyard grass and green foxtail are kind of indicators for this issue. Obviously, there's other reasons you could have those disease or those weeds out there, but oftentimes when trying to find a low pH spot on a field, there's going to be a whole lot of barnyard grass and green foxtail. And there's actually a paper that's over 40 years old that shows that green foxtail actually grows better in an acid environment versus a neutral or alkaline. So there are going to be more weeds in those areas, and also potentially because some of our herbicides aren't working well in those areas. So if your lime is, you need to lime those fields if your pH is dropping, and just be very aware of your surface pH while making herbicide applications, right? So nearly half of my surveyed growers and consultants are composite testing. And if you have a high pH spot in a field and a low pH spot in a field, you're going to miss some of these spots because of dilution. So we got to start zone testing more often. I'm not saying you need a grid sample every field, but we need to get more site specific, right? So we do have a publication out on what is soil acidity. So if you'd like to learn more about that, otherwise feel free to reach out. And you know, because we are so dry, a lot of the times, about 2/3 of the times, guys are cutting their corn for silage just due to not having enough yield potential out there. And kind of in those situations, forage is maybe a greater need. So with that, feel free to sign up for weekly updates from the Dickinson REC. You can find that on the Dickinson REC's website as well. And it's a great resource, comes out once a week. We have information from range management to livestock to agronomy. So feel free to sign up for that. And here is my contact information. And I think my time is just about up here.